I don't know about you, but it seems to me that in the art community, gouache has been receiving quite a bit of attention lately, especially with the Himi Gouache Set and the brand new Arrtx Jelly Cup set. So I thought it would be fun to kind of compare all of the gouache that I have and tell you guys which is worth your money and which one I think is the best. So, in front of me I have the Fine Touch Gouache Set. It came from Hobby Lobby. I think it was under about $20. We'll get into the prices later, but I just kind of give a rough estimate. I also have a Holbein set. I've obviously used it a little bit, but since this set is so spendy, I try not to touch it as much. This was also gifted to me, so I'm cheap. I did not buy this. Really, I use mostly the Arrtx set and the Himi set, so those are the only ones that I really know. I haven't really gone deep enough into these ones to know which one is best. So I'm going to compare all of these today to let you guys know which gouache is best and which one is worth your money, especially in these trying times. I've made a chart. I'm going to be testing all of these things. There's nothing here. I didn't really know what to put here, so maybe I'll figure it out as we go. But I wanted to test all of these things to see which gouache worked best. Enough talking, I'm just gonna get into it. We're just gonna do this, let's go. So I've gone ahead and just filled out the price beforehand so I wouldn't have to go back and forth between like looking up the item and then calculating the price, so I just figured this would be easier. All of these prices are going to be in US dollars. They are rounded up. So to start, I have the Arrtx 60 tube set. On Arrtx's website, this retails for $55 American, which brings each tube to be about 83 cents per tube, so that's really not that bad. Up next, we have the Master's Touch, which you can get at Hobby Lobby. And the Master's Touch is a 24 set retailing for about $20. Again, about 83 cents per tube. Not bad. The Himi Gouache Set, the Jelly Cup set that everybody loves. On Amazon, the 18 cup set retails for about $24 American, which adds up to about $1.33 per cup. The Arrtx, which is very similar to the Himi Gouache, I've been told, is also an 18 set, which also retails for $24 on Amazon and is also $1.33 per cup. Now we're at the expensive end, where the Holbein is a 12 tube set, and on Blick's website it retails for $67, but Blick has it for $45 for 12 tubes, which comes out to about $3.66 per tube. Overall, these two are the same, these two are the same, this one's spendy. Right? Okay. So far, they're all fairly similar except for the Holbein, but we know that because Holbein is expensive. We're just using it as kind of a baseline, right, to see how good these gouache sets are. As far as availability, excuse my handwriting, but Arrtx is online only. The Master's Touch is, like I said, from Hobby Lobby, so it is in-store and online. The Himi Gouache Set, online only. As far as I know, I think only Amazon sells it. I could be wrong, but I've only ever seen it on Amazon. So same with the Arrtx, you can only get that online. And I know Arrtx has their own website where they sell this, but you can also get it on Amazon. The Holbein set, you can get in store and online. We've kind of got, somebody is making noise outside. Stop it. I think we've got a good mix here so far. So far, most of them are fairly cheap, and a couple of them are available in store, but mostly online. So if you can't buy things online, which I don't know why you wouldn't be able to, but some people can't, we're gonna move on to actually testing the paints. So for each of these, I have decided to just do as close to the primary colors as I can get. They're not going to be exact, they're just going to be, close enough, so just so we have like a fair comparison. For Arrtx, we're going to start with vermilion red, lemon yellow, and cerulean blue. I know that these aren't the actual primaries, but the primary colors are red, yellow, and blue, okay? So we're just going to test these to see, just off of a basic first-hand experience, how they look and how they feel going down on papers. So these are just straight from the tube. There is no water in them diluting them. I've made sure to wipe my brush off pretty good. So far so good. These feel creamy, these feel smooth, they feel nice, and for the price, I can't really complain so far. And they are very opaque. So far, the Arrtx's are performing very well. They're very opaque, they apply smoothly. I don't know, they're nice, I like them. But I also use Arrtx Gouache primarily, so maybe we'll see if I like a different gouache better, and then you guys can get an idea of what you might like better. Next, we're gonna move to the Master's Touch. So again, I'm just gonna use lemon yellow, scarlet. The set also has a cerulean blue, so we're gonna use that as well. So I'm noticing as I'm getting these out of the tube and onto my palette, they are a bit oily. That could just be from them sitting and not really being used, but I do notice that as soon as I take them out of the tube, they're kind of oily. Okay. That's pretty opaque. Ooh, okay. Maybe there's a little bit of water on my brush, because I don't know if you can tell, but that is not very opaque. It's actually quite transparent. So let me dry off my brush like really, really good just to make sure that's not what it is. Oh, no, okay. So the blue is just so the red was very opaque, but the blue is extremely transparent. So that's interesting to know. So the yellow looks like it's maybe also just a little bit transparent, but I mean, this is the Hobby Lobby's brand, so I'm not really expecting too much for them. So now we're moving on to the Himi Gouache. So I would just like to preface, I have used my Himi Gouache set quite a bit, and yes, for people asking, they do dry up. After a while, they will get kind of dry, they will get like this, but they can be reactivated with water. They won't still have that creamy look to them, but they still function just fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So they still kind of hold a creamy consistency, sort of, but not what you would get from straight out of the tube. It's almost more watercolor effect after these dry out. They still work really nicely. So you can tell they're just a little more transparent because they have dried out. People usually will mix them together. I don't usually do that because it's kind of a mess. You can layer these, so you might have to build a few layers with these, but you can get that very opaque consistency. It just is gonna take a little bit longer if you let these dry out. They will dry out eventually. I don't think there's any way to keep them from drying out. A lot of people have asked questions about this like all over the internet. They do dry out, but they still function just fine. So if you keep them closed and keep them, you know, airtight, they're not gonna dry out as quickly, but they will eventually dry out. So yeah, same thing, still quite transparent, but like I said, I let these dry out, so that's going to be expected. So you're going to have to layer these. The yellow came out actually just a little bit more opaque, I think. It's still a little watery, but it looks a bit brighter, not as transparent. So, okay, cool. Next, we are moving on to the Arrtx set. I actually have not opened these yet, so I am going to do that quickly, and you can see me open a couple of these because some people like that. So this will be kind of like a first opening review also because I haven't used these yet. Ooh, okay. So this actually comes with a little swatch card, which I don't think the Himi set did. I'm gonna take them all out, take the tops off of them, and then get to work on this. Okay, so I've got these all done. As you can see, they look a little oily, and I will say that some of them were a lot easier to open than others. I did stain my finger already, so that's nice. I'm just gonna go ahead and get into this. So far these look very similar to the Himi gouache. They look very thick, very creamy. That's what the Himi gouache looks like when you first get it, so it's the same thing essentially. So we're just gonna start with a little bit of red. Oh wow, okay. So you can tell a difference, right? So the Himi gouache has dried up in the palette, but it also has dried up on my paper, and as it dries up, you can tell that it becomes just a little more opaque as it dries, whereas the Master's Touch does not, or Fine Touch does not. So here, it applies very thick, very smooth. That's to be expected from these jelly cup gouaches. So the yellow also looks really nice. The red was a lot darker than I expected it to be, but that's also the only red in this palette. So if you want like a more light red, you're gonna have to mix that yourself, I guess. So far so good. I'm gonna put this away and actually close it up so that it doesn't dry out. All right, last but not least, we have the Holbein Gouache Set that we're going to do. With this one, we're gonna do Permanent Yellow, Carmine, and Ultramarine Deep because it's like the only blue in the set. There's a Prussian blue, but I think this one's a little closer to the primary, so we're just gonna do that. So I just got them out of the tube and onto my palette, and red and yellow came out okay, but the blue is like dried up and barely creamy, so we're gonna just have to see how that works, I guess. The red looks really good so far. Not quite as thick, but extremely opaque. Oh, I went out of order, oops. Blue, like I said, has dried up a little bit, so it's, yeah. I mean, it's opaque, but it's dried up just a tad. It's semi-transparent down towards the end, but it's still fairly opaque, but it did dry out a little bit, and I don't know if that's because I didn't have the cap on right, or if Holbein gouache just tends to dry out after not being used for a while. I have no idea. So next we're going to move on to opacity test. So I am going to draw just like a black line on each of these, and I'm going to use each of the primary colors to see how opaque they are, because like I said, in just the primary swatching, like the Arrtx and the Arrtx seem extremely opaque, but are they really? So let's test that out. These lines aren't going to be even or pretty, just so you know. I'm doing my best. That's all we can ask for. So looking at this, the Arrtx ones did okay. I wouldn't say that they did spectacular, but they're not too bad. I mean, you can absolutely layer these and build up the paint, but you don't want to build it up too much because gouache has a tendency to crack with too many layers on it. So definitely decent, but I don't know that it's the best so far. So let's move on to the Master's Touch or Fine Touch. So as kind of expected, the Fine Touch, the red did okay, but the blue and the yellow are absolutely transparent. They don't pass the opacity test very well. I mean, like I said, you could layer these as well, and I think that they're at least good enough for practicing with, but as far as if you want very opaque colors, I don't know that this is your best bet. So as I expected, because they are dried out and I did have to water them down in order to activate them, it does give off a very watercolory look, so they aren't extremely opaque. They do fine, but they're not the most opaque after they've dried out. So the Arrtx Gouache, even though it's extremely creamy and seemed really opaque in the primary swatches, it doesn't do too bad, but it's also not the best either. If the Himi Gouache was still in that creamy consistency, I would imagine it would compare more to that because they're essentially the same thing, just a different brand, honestly. So far I'm noticing no difference between the two, other than the Himi Gouache are a little dried out, so the consistency is going to be different, but once the Arrtx jelly cups dry out, it'll likely be the same. Last, we're going to test the Holbein. So with the Holbein, not sure what happened there, but in the yellow, but the red did very well. The blue I struggled with because it was so dry, so I did have to water it down just to get it to apply to the paper. It actually did okay, even being watered down, the opacity is still pretty good. The yellow is not so great, especially for these being such high quality gouache. Like in comparison, the Arrtx ones are actually more opaque than the Holbein, which is very interesting. So next we're going to move on to the consistency. You basically saw me swatch all of these paints out already, so I'm just going to write the consistency down to make things simpler. So for the consistency on these guys, Arrtx was very smooth and creamy, I thought. It applied very well and it was pretty good for it being just a smaller art company. The Master's Touch was actually quite oily when it came out of the tube and slightly watery, which is really weird. Like, I don't know how that works, but they were a bit odd for gouache, I thought. The Himi Gouache was smooth, applied very nice, and it was watercolor-like because I had let them dry out, but they still applied very smoothly and still pretty vibrant. The Arrtx Gouache was rich, smooth, and creamy to apply. Because they're still in that jelly-like state, they are going to be a lot nicer to look at, but overall, they were actually quite satisfying to paint with. The Holbeins were also very nice, but they were extremely thick, so in order to get any longevity out of painting with just a little bit of paint, you will need to apply water in order to get them to last a little bit longer. The blue, like I said, was dried out, so I don't know if that is just because it sat for so long or what, but I was a little disappointed with that, and I did absolutely have to apply water in order to get it to work. Overall, not so bad. So now we're going to test how these look when we dilute them. So we've done all of these. I did have some issues with the paint kind of seeping into each other because I got it too close, but we're going to try to ignore that. So for the Arrtx, it actually dilutes quite well. It still keeps that rich pigment, but it, is a lighter tone, and I think it works really well for diluting. The Master's Touch did okay. It diluted pretty well, it holds its color pretty well, but it already was kind of watery and oily, like I said, so I only used the tiniest bit of water to get that much dilution. The Himi Gouache also did fine. I think that it diluted really well, especially because it is already slightly diluted because you have to activate it with water. As far as it still keeping its color, I think it performed quite well. The Arrtx did okay. I think you're gonna have to use quite a bit of water to get it to dilute. So it did dilute a little bit. I also got some colored seepage in there, so sorry. But it diluted okay, but I think for these ones you are going to need to use quite a bit of water if you want to dilute it to a really light color, almost transparent. In the Holbein, same thing. The blue diluted okay, but the other two colors are still quite vibrant and bright, so you will definitely need a lot of water to get those to dilute properly. Okay, so our final test is blendability. So I'm just going to blend all of these together and see how they do and how well or not well they blend. So let's go for it. So after blending all of these together, I think they all performed fairly well. They all blended together fairly easily. I had some issues with the Arrtx, but it wasn't the paint, it was me. I was just trying something different and it just wasn't working out very well, but they still blended together. It didn't quite create that purpley color that I was really looking for, but it did create the green and the orange. The Master's Touch actually did pretty good as far as blendability goes. The purple is just a little bit muddy, but it worked, and the green and the orange worked well also. The Himi Gouache is very light, but they did blend. Same with the Arrtx. They blended out very well. They were smooth and easy to blend. The Holbein was actually quite difficult to blend because they were so thick. Each color would kind of take over the other, and it was kind of hard to get them to blend out. But the purple is extremely dark. I don't know if you can quite tell. It almost looks black on camera. The green is extremely muddy, and the orange is just more red than orange. So the Holbein, in my opinion, didn't do quite well on this test. So let's look at this overall to give it an overall score. The Arrtx's are cheap for what they are. They are only available online, so that can kind of hinder some people. The primary colors are very bright. The opacity is very good. They are smooth and creamy. They dilute quite well, and they blend together fairly well. So for the Arrtx's, I'm actually going to score these as an 8 out of 10. To me, the Arrtx's were actually quite impressive, and I use them quite often, so I may be biased towards them, but I do know that they are very good gouache sets. So I'm going to give them a high rating because I like them. Master's Touch didn't do that well overall. For the 24 set, it's only $20, so that's 83 cents a tube. That's not too terrible. That's actually fairly cheap. This is available both in-store and online, so it is more accessible for some people, which is a good thing. The primaries were a little transparent, almost closer to watercolors rather than gouache. The opacity test, it did actually fairly well. The yellow is fairly transparent, but that's to be said with all of them, I think. The red did good, and the blue is just a little more transparent than I would have liked, but overall not too bad. They do have a oily and slightly watery consistency to them, which is quite strange, and I have not seen in gouache before. I don't know if that could be a problem with your painting later, but for this test it seemed to do just fine. The dilution test, it did fine. Like I said, they were already kind of watery, so they diluted quite well. And for the blendability test, they did pretty good. So overall, I think these ones are going to receive a 6 out of 10. The Himi gouache for an 18 set is $24, which comes out to $1.33 per cup. They are only available online. The primaries are still quite vibrant for being dried out. The opacity test, the red and the yellow were kind of but the blue did very well. The consistency was smooth and watercolor-like, so if you're more biased towards watercolors rather than acrylic, having this set dried out would be the best for you, but it's still extremely comparable to the Arrtx because they are essentially the same. It's just that the Himi gouache has dried out. The blendability test, they blended together just fine. They are just a little light, so overall, I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. The Arrtx is $24 for an 18 cup set, which comes out to about $1.33 per cup. They are only available online, but they are available through Amazon and Arrtx's website. The primaries are very bright and opaque. Did pretty well on the opacity test. The yellow didn't do quite as well. But the blue and the red did pretty good. They are rich, smooth, and creamy, so if you want to work with creamier paints, you want a brighter, smoother color, these did really well in that. The dilution test, since they were so thick and creamy, they diluted okay, but it's probably going to take a little more water to get them to dilute to a really light color. For the blendability test, they did really well. We got a really dark purple here, a nice vibrant green, and the orange is still just a little on the red side, but they did blend together easily. So for these, they are also going to receive an 8 out of 10. Last but not least, we have the Holbein. The Holbein was the most expensive set out of all of these sets. For a 12 set, they are $44 on Blick's website. Normally they are $60. But on Blick's website, they are about $3.66 a tube. They are available in-store and online. If you have a Blick store, you should be able to purchase them at the physical store, but you can also purchase them online if you would like. The primaries are very vibrant and opaque and smooth. The opacity test, they did really well. Red is almost completely opaque. The blue is also extremely opaque. The blue probably did the best out of all of them. And the yellow, even though yellow is extremely hard to be opaque, it didn't do as well as I would have expected with these being so expensive. These gouache tubes were thick and the blue was dry, so you need to add water to these if you don't want to use the whole paint tube. You actually have to get these to be a little bit looser because they are extremely thick. For the dilution, because they're extremely thick, you are going to need a ton of water to dilute these to a really light color. So that could be good and that could be bad depending on the circumstance. I don't actually love that so much. And for the blending test, I think that they blended the worst out of all of these sets. The purple is very muddy. The green is an extremely kind of yucky color. It didn't come out as good as the rest of them did. And the orange is a little bit better than the other two, but it is still mostly on the red side, and it was very difficult to not have the red overpower the yellow in this. So for this one, I'm going to actually give the Holbein set a 6 out of 10. After testing all of these gouache sets, my personal opinion, I think that the Arrtx Gouache Set and the Arrtx Gouache Set is your best bet. If you want just a small little gouache set to get you started, the Arrtx is definitely the way to go. I would say the same for the Himi, but I mean, mine's kind of dried out, so I'm just going to go with the one that's not. It is fairly cheap. It's not the cheapest, but it's fairly cheap. It's online. You can get it through Amazon or Arrtx's website. It's very easy to get. I think the results from that are nice and they came out really well, and they would give even a first-time user a good experience with gouache. Same with the Arrtx set. I think the Arrtx did really well. You can get a smaller set, but I was just kind of going off of what I have. So for a 60 set for $55, that's only 83 cents a tube. So while it does seem a little spendy up front, it is actually one of the cheaper sets of gouache, especially for 60 tubes. 83 cents a tube, that's really good. They are a great starter set, but can also be used in more serious pieces, in my opinion. I think that the Arrtx Gouache and the Arrtx Gouache are amazing. If you are really, really new to gouache and you just want to see if you'll like it, I think the Master's Touch is a good option. just to kind of see if that's something that you're going to enjoy. But honestly, for $4 more, you get a nicer set of gouache, and it's just overall a better experience than the Master's Touch. So I would definitely choose that one over that one. But if you have a Hobby Lobby in your area, these ones are an okay option too. So my final verdict, Arrtx and Arteza. Go for those ones. If you really want to do expensive, Holbein is actually okay, but most of us don't want to do expensive. So let me know what you guys thought of this video. I know that this is a little different from what I've been doing normally, but I really also wanted to do this comparison for myself, just to kind of see what performed and what didn't, and which one maybe I should be using over the other, and now I definitely know. So if you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them below. I try to answer every comment that I can. Again, I just want to thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking my videos. If you have any suggestions for something that you would like to see in the future, please let me know. I am trying to make as many videos as I can with the time that I have. So yeah, it's been a struggle lately, but I'm working on getting more out. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!